Welcome to the deep dive. When we're trying to figure out what's true, what's reliable in this world, the natural sciences often get held up as, well, the gold standard.
Mhm.
You hear it all the time, right?
Yeah,
Science says. And that phrase carries a lot of weight.
it really does, and often for very good reason. I mean, the natural sciences have given us so much, everything from life-saving medicines to, well, the tech that powers our everyday lives.
Definitely.
But we're not just here to, celebrate the wins. We want to really dig into why these sciences have earned that reputation, and also look at where things can falter
Mhm.
and understand the other forces, the sort of background forces that shape scientific work.
Exactly. We've pulled together a really fascinating collection of sources for you, looking at historical breakthroughs, how research gets done today,
Hmm.
the methods, but also the bigger picture of how science operates, out in the world. Our goal is really to give you a solid understanding of what makes science tick.
So today we're going to cover quite a bit. We'll kick things off by trying to pin down what exactly we mean by a natural science and, importantly, how it differs from pseudoscience.
Right.
Then we'll get into the core reasons we generally trust scientific findings. We'll also explore those big, sometimes disruptive shifts in scientific thinking, paradigm shifts.
Yeah, those are fascinating.
And we'll look at the push for more open science, which is a big movement right now, and consider how things like funding and, yes, politics can play a role.
Crucial factors.
And finally, we'll kind of loop back and revisit some of the really fundamental questions about what science can and perhaps can't tell us. Ready to jump in?
Absolutely. Okay, so first up, what is a natural science? Our sources really point to systematic observation as being fundamental. And this isn't just, casually looking at something.
No, not at all.
It's about careful, methodical recording. Think way back to Johannes Kepler, meticulously charting the planet's movements centuries ago. That incredibly painstaking work year after year was the bedrock for so much astronomy.
And it wasn't just that he looked right, it was the sheer volume and dedication over years. That tells you something about the patience sometimes required.
Exactly, the commitment to detail.
And that dedication to rigorous observation is, well, it's just as important today, but now we have these incredibly advanced tools. LIGO, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, is a fantastic modern example.
Ah yes, LIGO.
Scientists spent, what, 2 decades just perfecting their instruments to detect these unbelievably tiny ripples in space-time gravitational waves that Einstein predicted 100 years earlier.
Incredible.
It really shows that sometimes building the right tool, that whole journey, is almost as critical as the discovery itself.
That's a great point. And it does make you wonder, as our instruments get more and more sensitive, how does that extend our knowledge? But also, could it subtly, distort our perception in some ways?
That's a deep question, yeah. Food for thought.
So observation is one piece. Then there were controlled experiments. Robert Millikan's oil drop experiment is a classic, right? Gave us a surprisingly accurate measure of the electron's charge way back when.
A textbook example of isolating a variable.
And now fast forward to today, and we see just incredible precision with things like CRISPR base editing. I mean, scientists can literally go into the DNA of lab mice, flip a single letter, and cure a type of hereditary blindness.
Yeah.
That level of control is staggering.
It is remarkable. And that precise manipulation, that ability to change just one thing and see the effect, really highlights a key scientific method. Isolating variables to test specific hypotheses. You control the conditions to try and establish clearer cause and effect.
Okay, so we have observation, controlled experiments, and building on that is the idea of theory. Developing these overarching frameworks that help us understand and connect all those observations and results.
Yes, the unifying structure.
Newtonian mechanics was obviously a huge one, historically. Today, maybe think about plate tectonics. It's not just a description of continents moving.
Right, it explains so much more.
Exactly. Earthquakes, volcanoes. It even feeds into our understanding of climate science, letting us model things like volcanic colo emissions. It connects different fields.
Which brings up a fascinating point. What makes a good scientific explanation? Is it just the simplest one, Occam's razor? Or is it the one with the most predictive power?
Good question.
Or maybe there are other factors, like how well a theory connects seemingly unrelated things. A theory that provides that kind of elegant unification might feel really valuable, even if its predictions aren't perfect everywhere.
That makes sense. And these aren't just abstract concepts floating around in labs. The real-world impact can be immense. Take LIGO again. Detecting those gravitational waves wasn't just ticking a box for Einstein's theory.
No, it was the start of something new.
It opened up a whole new field, gravitational wave astronomy, a new way to listen to the universe. And within, what, 6 years? We went from hearing nothing to listening to neutron stars colliding.
Unbelievable progress.
And that changed our understanding of how heavy elements like gold are actually formed. It's even changing, apparently, GCSE textbooks on the origin of gold. Shows how fundamental discoveries ripple outwards.
Absolutely. Okay, so we got a handle on some key features of natural science. But then there's the tricky question. How do we distinguish it from pseudoscience? Things that look scientific but aren't.
Right, the lines in the sand. Our sources point to a few key differentiators. Falsifiability is a big one.
The Popper criterion, can it be proven wrong?
Exactly. Compare something like astrology, making horoscope predictions that are often so vague or general they could apply to anyone. They're basically unfalsifiable.
You can always find a way to make them fit.
Whereas LIGO, well, they did the complete opposite. They published everything, their algorithms, their data analysis, even details about the instrument noise, specifically so others could scrutinize it, look for flaws. That willingness to be proven wrong is pretty fundamental to the scientific mindset.
Transparency is another key piece. Think about the COVID-19 vaccine development, incredibly rapid as it was. The detailed plans for the clinical trials, the protocols, were often put up on preprint servers before the results were even known.
Ah, interesting. So people could check the methodology beforehand.
Exactly. It allowed the whole scientific community to look at the design and the methods right away. Now contrast that with, say, many trials claiming benefits for homeopathic treatments for things like long COVID, where you often just don't see that level of upfront transparency about the methods.
Got it. And then there's replication. Science ideally isn't built on a single one-off finding.
No, that's usually a red flag.
Remember that claim a few years back from an Italian team about neutrinos supposedly traveling faster than light? Big news.
Huge news, yeah. Would have overturned physics.
But then other groups tried to replicate the experiment and couldn't get the same result. Eventually, CERN investigated and found the issue was mundane, a faulty fiber optic cable connection.
Oops.
Right. But that whole process, the initial claim, the attempts to replicate, finding the error, that's how science self-corrects, it's a crucial mechanism for maintaining credibility.
It really is. Which leads to a really interesting TOK kind of question, doesn't it? If some pseudosciences trying to mimic the methods they use, scientific jargon, maybe present some data, is the method alone enough to define science?
Good point.
Or are those community norms we've been talking about, things like peer review, open data sharing, that commitment to falsifiability, are they just as, or maybe even more, essential to what science really is?
So it's not just what you do, but how the community around it operates.
It suggests science is maybe more than just a set of techniques. It's also a set of shared values and practices, a kind of social contract within that community.
That definitely makes you think about where our trust comes from. So given all this, why do we generally feel confident in scientific knowledge? Our sources highlight several strong reasons. One is this idea of cumulative testing.
Right. It's not about one killer experiment proving everything forever.
No, it's more like building a case over time, with lots of different studies, different lines of evidence, all pointing in a similar direction.
Exactly. Think about Newton predicting Mercury's orbit. It was incredibly accurate, like 99.9% correct. But that tiny remaining wobble, the bit his laws couldn't quite explain.
The anomaly.
Yes. That anomaly eventually became a key piece of evidence supporting Einstein's completely different theory of general relativity.
Wow. So the error itself became useful.
Precisely. Or think about climate models. Early ones, back in the 80s, definitely underestimated how quickly Arctic sea ice would melt. But those inaccuracies didn't mean climate science was wrong.
No, they learned from them.
Exactly. They provided valuable data that helped researchers refine the physics, improve the models, leading to today's much more sophisticated tools, like the CMIP6 models. It's a continuous process of refinement based on evidence.
Okay, cumulative testing. Another big reason for trust is quantification, the drive to measure things precisely.
Putting numbers on things?
Look at the James Webb Space Telescope. It's just mind-blowing. Analyzing atmospheres of planets light years away.
GJ 9827D, yeah.
And measuring tiny traces of water vapor by looking at how specific wavelengths of light are absorbed down to parts per million. That level of precision is what allows scientists to plug data into equations about potential habitability. It's astounding.
The numbers matter, and then there's independent scrutiny, different teams checking each other's work.
Right. The mRNA COVID vaccine development in 2020 is a really powerful recent example.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just one trial. There were, what, 5 large overlapping phase 3 trials spread across 3 continents, different populations, different research teams, all essentially asking the same question.
Plus, there was that unusual level of transparency with public dashboards tracking reported adverse events in near real time. That multi-layered independent checking builds a really strong foundation for trust.
Yeah, you can see how that would build confidence. And the real-world ripple effect is significant, too. The sheer speed of that mRNA vaccine rollout actually forced regulatory agencies worldwide to rethink their processes.
They had to adapt.
They developed these new rolling review procedures where they evaluate data as it comes in instead of waiting for the whole package at the end. And that's now actually part of the legal framework in the EU. It shows how scientific breakthroughs can literally change how our institutions work.
Which brings us neatly to another really transformative aspect of science. These moments of radical change, paradigm shifts.
Ah, yes, when everything gets turned upside down.
Pretty much. These are the revolutions where the fundamental assumptions, the whole worldview within a scientific field, get overthrown and replaced by something new.
And often triggered by those anomalies we mentioned, right? Things that just don't fit the old picture.
Exactly. Observations are results that the existing paradigm simply cannot explain no matter how hard people try to patch it up.
Think about the classic shift
Yeah.
from the Ptolemaic universe with Earth stuck in the center
Geocentrism.
to the Copernican model with the sun at the center. A key anomaly for the old model was explaining why Mars sometimes looked like it moved backwards in the sky retrograde motion.
It required incredibly complicated explanations, epicycles upon epicycles.
Whereas the sun-centered model explained it much more simply and elegantly. And crucially, this wasn't just rearranging the cosmic furniture. It had huge societal reverberations.
Oh, absolutely. Challenged religious cosmology, changed our whole sense of place in the universe, paved the way for modern astronomy.
Another huge one. The shift from classical physics deterministic clockwork universe
Everything predictable in theory?
to quantum mechanics. A big anomaly there was the ultraviolet catastrophe. Classical physics predicted that a perfect black body should emit infinite energy at high frequencies, which obviously doesn't happen.
Clearly wrong.
Quantum mechanics emerged as this completely bizarre, probabilistic way of understanding matter and energy at the smallest scales.
Yeah.
And its impact. Well, look around. Semiconductors in every chip, every sensor in your phone, lasers, MRI machines, it underpins so much of modern tech.
It's fundamental, and a more recent example, maybe still unfolding in some ways, is in medicine with CRISPR gene editing.
Right. Before CRISPR, many genetic diseases like sickle cell were seen as, well, tragic, but largely untreatable at the root cause.
You could manage symptoms, but not fix the underlying genetic issue.
That inability to cure, despite other medical advances, was almost like an anomaly itself, a persistent problem the existing toolkit couldn't solve. Then comes CRISPR, and the FDA approval of Casgevy therapy in 2023 to treat sickle cell. That marks a major paradigm shift. The potential to actually cure these conditions by editing genes. It's a whole new way of thinking.
It really is, and it opens up huge ethical debates too, of course. But it's fascinating to consider Thomas Kuhn's insight here. He argued that paradigm shifts don't just change the facts we accept.
They change the questions, too.
Exactly. They redefine what questions are even considered interesting or valid to ask. Take gravitational wave astronomy again. Now scientists are actively investigating things like how common are intermediate mass black holes.
A type they couldn't really detect before.
Right. Before 2015, before LIGO's detections, that question was almost irrelevant, purely theoretical. Now, it's a hot topic because the new paradigm, the new capability, makes it possible to actually look for them. The questions themselves evolve.
That's really insightful. And this idea of science evolving, constantly refining its practices, is really highlighted by the recent discussions around the replication crisis.
Yes, particularly prominent in fields like psychology, but affecting others too.
The realization that quite a few published findings, even in top journals, couldn't be consistently reproduced by other independent researchers. That caused quite a stir.
It certainly did. But importantly, it led to a significant push for reforms aimed at making research more reliable and trustworthy.
We're seeing the adoption of new norms, right?
Right.
Things like pre-registration.
Yes, where researchers publicly state their hypothesis, methods, and analysis plan before collecting data, reduces the temptation to, well, cherry-pick results later.
Registered reports.
Right. Journals agreeing in principle to publish a study based on the strength of its methodology before the results are known. So high-quality research gets published regardless of whether the findings are positive or negative, statistically significant or not.
And just a general push for open data, making the raw data available so others can check the analysis.
Exactly. And these practices are spreading now into areas like cancer biology, ecology. It's a broad shift.
What's really crucial to grasp here, I think, is that these methodological reforms, this whole debate about reproducibility,
Yeah.
that itself is a form of knowledge creation.
How so?
Well, it shows that reliability in science isn't some fixed, static quality. It's something that the community actively discusses, negotiates, and works to improve over time. It's an evolving standard.
That's a great way to put it. Science learning about how to do science better. Now, we also need to touch on the less purely intellectual influences: funding, power, politics. These definitely shape the scientific landscape.
Absolutely unavoidable. Our sources give some clear examples. Think about big pharma versus neglected diseases.
Mm-hmm. Profit motive is a factor.
There was a major breakthrough in 2024 using AI to discover a new antibiotic for drug-resistant gonorrhea. But the funding came largely from a nonprofit initiative. Why? Because the projected profits for developing such an antibiotic were considered too low by major pharmaceutical companies.
So, important research might not happen if it doesn't look profitable, even if the need is huge.
Exactly. Or consider the energy transition. The U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, for instance, included massive subsidies.
Yes, huge government investment.
And that directly accelerated research into things like quantum dot solar cells, helping move that technology from labs towards actual gigawatt-scale production much faster than might have otherwise happened. Clear political influence driving a specific scientific direction.
And sometimes the influence isn't just about funding priorities, it can be about actively distorting the science itself.
Ah, the darker side.
We have the historical example of the tobacco industry's playbook from the 60s through the 90s. They funded scientists, not necessarily to find truth, but to manufacture doubt about the links between smoking and cancer.
The doubt science strategy.
Exactly. Deliberately sowing uncertainty, promoting skepticism, essentially sabotaging the scientific consensus for commercial gain, with some scientists acting as paid skeptics. A stark example of how powerful interests can try to manipulate the process.
Which really brings up another tough TOK question. To what extent should we consider the source of funding, the patron, as almost a way of knowing in the natural sciences?
Oh.
How much does who pays influence what gets discovered or what gets emphasized?
It's a critical question to keep asking. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. Let's circle back, as promised, to some of those really big, almost philosophical questions about the scope and limits of science, but maybe with some fresh perspectives from our discussion.
Sounds good. One classic question. Are there things, phenomena, that will just always be beyond the reach of science?
Yeah.
Forever unknowable through scientific methods?
It's a profound question. Consciousness studies provide a really interesting contemporary angle here.
How so?
Well, we're getting incredibly good at mapping the physical correlates of mental states. Using fMRI, we can see which brain areas light up when someone is dreaming or recognizing a face or feeling fear. We can track the neural activity.
Right, the physical side.
But the subjective experience itself, the feeling of redness, the taste of coffee, what philosophers call qualia, that first-person internal quality, can science ever truly explain that? Or only correlate it with brain states? It's still a huge mystery and a source of intense debate. Will we ever bridge that explanatory gap?
It feels like a fundamental challenge. Another big question. Is the main goal of science prediction, or is it explanation? Or both?
That's a great one. And you see examples pushing in both directions. Take earthquake early warning systems, like those used in Japan.
Okay.
They use AI to analyze seismic data and can predict the arrival of strong shaking, maybe seconds, sometimes tens of seconds, in advance. Incredibly useful for prediction, gives people a moment to take cover.
Life-saving, potentially.
Absolutely. But it doesn't necessarily offer a deep causal explanation of exactly why that specific rupture happened at that precise moment. It's more about pattern recognition for rapid prediction.
Whereas something like plate tectonics.
Exactly. Plate tectonics provides a powerful explanation for why earthquakes cluster in certain zones, along plate boundaries. It explains the underlying mechanism. So you have science aiming for useful prediction and science aiming for deep causal understanding. Both aims clearly coexist and are valuable.
That makes sense. What about the role of language itself? Does the language we use shape how we even think about science?
That's a fascinating linguistic and cultural point. Our sources mention the Mandarin word for science, see kokosui.
Okay.
Its meaning is quite broad, often connoting systematic study in general. And in common usage, it can sometimes encompass fields that, in English, we might strictly separate as humanities or social sciences.
Interesting. So the boundaries might feel different depending on the language.
Potentially, yes. It suggests that the semantic range of a word like science could subtly influence how different fields of knowledge are perceived within a culture, maybe even the level of epistemic trust placed in them. Something relevant, perhaps, for listeners in bilingual or multilingual contexts.
Definitely food for thought. And one last point here. How technology doesn't just help science, but actively shapes its horizons.
Yeah.
What becomes possible to even investigate?
Oh, absolutely critical. The development of cryo-electron microscopy, cryo-EM, is a perfect example.
The Nobel Prize winner in 2017, right?
That's the one. This tech allows scientists to visualize biological molecules, like proteins, at near atomic resolution. Incredible detail.
And that was crucial for COVID.
Hugely important. Cryo-EM was absolutely essential for determining the precise 3D structure of the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, the part the virus uses to enter our cells.
And knowing that structure.
Was key to designing the mRNA vaccines so quickly and effectively. They needed to know the target's exact shape. Without that specific technological leap in imaging, our response to the pandemic would almost certainly have been much, much slower. Technology constantly opens new doors for science.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's really clear that the natural sciences are this incredibly powerful, dynamic way of understanding the world. It's a blend, isn't it? Disciplined empiricism, observation, experiment, married with these evolving community norms and practices.
That's a great summary. And the power is undeniable. We see it in gravitational wave antennas hearing cosmic collisions, in gene editing therapies offering potential cures, in global climate models projecting our future. But that power, crucially, comes from the rigor of the methods and the integrity of that whole social ecosystem, the testing, the scrutiny, the funding, the revision.
And, as the theory of knowledge perspective reminds us, while we should appreciate that power, we also need to avoid, blind scientism. Keep a critical eye. Every breakthrough seems to bring new questions.
Ethical dilemmas, like with CRISPR access and equity. Political implications, who pays for the seawalls suggested by climate models. Philosophical puzzles, like the nature of consciousness.
So for you, the listener, as a knower navigating the world, there's maybe a twofold task here.
I think so. First, to trust intelligently. To understand why the findings from, say, large, double-blind, replicated trials carry so much more weight than anecdotes or poorly designed studies, recognize the hallmarks of reliable science.
Right, informed trust.
And second, to question responsibly. To be aware of the underlying assumptions, like the uniformity of nature or the idea of complete value neutrality, and to engage critically with the implications of scientific findings, not just accept them passively.
That's a great challenge for all of us. So we'll leave you with this final thought. Think about a concept, any concept, that you currently understand in a particular way, maybe something you take for granted. How might the ongoing, self-correcting adventure of science potentially reshape your understanding of that very concept in the years to come? It's always worth pondering.